it's always weird because the last time I said we are on air, I started talking, and that didn't get recorded on video. But anyways, so this I've been calling it JSON API, but it's not only JSON API. It's for improving web services and doing it in a manner that we can reuse efforts, right? Because many of the things that we will need to do in different web services approaches like GraphQL or JSON API, or maybe someone just wants to get crazy with HAL. These kind of things can be reused, and right now we can everyone on their own. So that is one point that I want to touch, but I want to wait for Sebastian if he can make it for that. And then the second one, I don't know if you guys got the link, maybe not. I'm going to drop a link in the Drupal Whiskey IRC channel. That is just to show the currently implemented features that we have. It's just more for later if you want. Basically, what we have, and this has improved a lot since last week, so yay. We've got, I'm going to start from scratch. So during DrupalCon week, we got sparse field sets, like selecting which fields you want from an entity. We got payload.
You broke up a bit. I don't know if that was just me.
Yeah, no, I heard it too.
Damn it. I don't know what to do.
Now you sound fine. If you just say we got sparse field sets.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we got includes, which is a way to embed the related entity, like the author from an article into the payload. So we got those things during DrupalCon during this week. And last week we got collections with filters, and filters work in every property, including properties in nested entities. So we can filter like articles based on the name of the author or the name of the category that is attached to the user, which is the author of the article. And you can get all the articles that meet that condition. So we got that in. We also have the related and relationships, which is something that Sebastian couldn't care less, which is only idiomatic in JSON API, but is a way to just operate for a given relationship. Like I want to post a relationship, and it's just making a link between two entities. So we got that, but for GET only. All the support that we have is for GET. And finally, just today, we got support for config entities, which is cool because we are reaching farther than what core has. I'm not sure if I forgot anything. What do you think? Did I forget anything?
No, I think you did. I think you did pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. In any case, there's that YouTube playlist that you can just go through the videos. They are the longest is like 3 minutes, and they are about 1 minute each. And you get the pleasure to hear my sweet, sweet voice. But yeah, given that Sebastian joined us, maybe we can talk about how can we reuse code and kind of join efforts with things like GraphQL. And like I said before, if someone wants to go nuts with HAL and implement the same features, because those are the features that every web service will need, right? Do we agree on that? Like, this kind of features is what we need.
Are you asking me?
I know, I'm asking the room. It seems like JSON API and GraphQL, from the get point of view, they do things very similarly. They provide very similar features. So that, and my experience working with web services tells me that this is the feature set that we want to support in general. And then we can get into how to implement them in every idiom, like JSON API, GraphQL, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So fundamentally, both JSON API, GraphQL, actually, and even REST or core REST have the same underlying layer, or should have the same underlying layer, because at the end of the day, all they do is access data from the Drupal data graph. If you think of Drupal as a graph of types that you can fetch data through, then it becomes very clear. Like GraphQL and JSON API provide the ability for you to fetch data that also like follows entity references and can be very hierarchical, while the REST module basically only provides you two-dimensional data access. So fetching entities and fetching fields from those entities. With GraphQL and JSON API, you can go much further. You can follow entity references and other things. But at the end of the day, both, or all three actually, just access data from that entire graph. So why don't we create a unified API layer that allows us to easily traverse that data graph and be able to generate a schema from that graph for any specification that might be out there. And then also make it so that we can use that same layer for fetching data and loading data, so that JSON API and GraphQL would not do all of that heavy lifting on their own, but simply would generate a schema based on that graph. And then when they want to fetch data, when a request comes in, they would just load it through the graph as well. And the graph takes care of optimizing the entity query API queries and other things that might turn up for loading. So that's the idea, essentially. And we discussed that during DrupalCon New Orleans. And the idea would be to set up a proper graph using a graph library with a node visitor pattern. So we can optimize the graph, we can iterate over all of the nodes and create shortcuts to simplify some of the verbosity of the core type system, like type data, where we, for example, have fields which are always lists, even though there might be single value fields. So, for example, in type data, even the node ID is exposed as a list. We don't want that. We also mostly have fields which have only a single property. We don't want to go ID list and then fetch the value from that. We want to say, okay, give me the node ID and directly get the node ID without any additional verbosity. So that would be solved by this node visitor pattern, allowing us to replace certain nodes with shortcuts that know how to traverse the entire complexity in type data afterwards, but hide that complexity from the consumer of that API. So that's basically the concept. And yeah.
I am really attracted to that concept, but I was trying to kind of, while working on the current implementation, which is nothing like that right now, thinking how we could do this. And right now, I think that the normalizers that we are writing, or the serialization system from Symfony, it's kind of using some of those principles, and we're just, whenever we want to go through an entity, and it's we're serializing a field, and we want to go through an entity, we just pass we load the entity and pass it, and since it's recursive, it just starts. So decoupling from the serialization system, it may be some piece of work. So we would be getting reusability from the graph fetching point of view, but we would then need to do the serialization ourselves. So I guess that.
Wait a second. No, I'm not suggesting that JSON API and REST should use something other than the serialization API. That could still be used. So serialization doesn't load data. That's the difference. So the graph traversal API would allow you to create a schema, to create documentation for the API and establish the resources, but it would not solve serialization. It would only solve setting up that schema and solve also loading of stuff. But serialization would still use the existing APIs.
Yeah, what I meant is that we do the actual loading of the data while serializing. So we inspect the context. The context of the serializer tells us, hey, this reference, you need to embed it. So we just load it and embed it, and it's dynamically done like that. I guess that what I really mean is that things will probably click better inside of me when I see some code.
Yeah.
And
well, the problem though with what you suggest or what you're saying is that that's not very optimized. So if you have a list of entities and you have an entity reference, in order to load those, it would not batch that loading process. It would load it one by one, and that's very inefficient. So that's why we need a graph that can preload these things.
Well, yeah, while that is true, it also adds its own set of problems, right? Especially with access and pagination. And because if you want a page of 10 items and you can't know in advance that you will have denied access in 9 of them, then you need to, recursively keep trying to load until you reach 10 and these kind of things. But I totally get your point. On the other side, though, we are reusing the render cache system, which is kind of a very big win for us because we just got that for free, absolutely free. Well, not absolutely, we just put some tags and context and that's it. But yeah, again, even if it's just for the schemas of the resources, because right now for us, for the JSON API implementation, the schema is just the schema of a bundle. And that's why we are tied to bundles, because we can have a schema there. We cannot have a schema for a node. So that part, I think that that should be very easily reusable between the two projects, generating the schemas for the resources or endpoints or whatever is called in GraphQL.
Yeah. And Sebastian, I do see what you're saying is if I understand it correctly, we would basically, if we could create something using that graph and do a query that fetched all of the children and referenced entities and stuff like that, we could basically perhaps like have some sort of entity caching system where as we're traversing that serialization, that tree, we wouldn't actually need to go and fetch the entity from the database that's already been loaded. In that normalization process, we could just grab it, right, from a cache.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be very still loading it, but having it in the cache already, like using the graph loading for cache warming. That's what you're suggesting, basically. Yeah, that's basically the easy solution. Yeah, should work. It's no problem. But the question is, do we need those additional? Like, I'm thinking, is there maybe a way where we can hand that data into the serialization process as a data pool that it can basically look at first before doing that the expensive entity storage calls, right? It would still go through all of those services and realize, hey, it's already in the cache, So I'm like thinking about a system maybe where you have like a preloaded you pass into the serialization process, which will look up first and see if it's already in there, and then fetch it from there directly. Something like that, maybe.
Yeah, I think like Matteo said, I would love to see code like that, and I think once we kind of saw what it looked like, I definitely think like warming the caches before that normalization step would be really cool, and I wouldn't have a problem with putting that in. I just I wouldn't even know where to begin, honestly.
Yeah, like we will have to start with the graph, and then I guess first we have the graph, and then from there on we continue with implementing these additional features. But what you're suggesting is definitely a good solution for the time being. So use the graph first, and then use the graph for cache warming, and use that stuff then in the serialization process. Sounds good.
Yeah, that's actually the approach that we took on while developing the RESTful module. We preload most of the entities and then just forget about entity loading and require entity cache, and that's pretty much it. I not only wouldn't care having it, but I would love to have that in, and especially just for the fact to have this shared library that we can all use. So,
yeah.
How do we start? Because it sounds like you have something in mind, really set.
I have a plan for the graph. I know how to write a graph, or how to create or generate a graph from the type system in Drupal. I have a rough plan for that. I also know how to set up the node visitor pattern, and I know how to make the graph nicely traversable. So I have an idea for an API that will really have a good DX. I finished the most complicated task. I set up a Git repository on GitHub.
Did you buy a domain name?
Empty. It's empty, so we have to put some code into that now. Unfortunately, I don't know how or when I can start working on that. It's a rough time to go. So I don't know how much I put into it in the next few days. I'm going to Bratislava. On the train ride, I might be able to put something together, which is 8 hours. So maybe, who knows? But I'm definitely interested in talking more about the API and how it would work with people who are interested in contributing to that effort. We have a GitHub team. It's called Drupal HTTP APIs, right, Matteo?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in like sharing more of the concept with anyone who's interested in working with that, working with me on that.
Cool. One of the questions about the implementation, and I have to warn you guys, I need to really leave in like 5 minutes. Is one of the questions is that I've always had the impression that graphs are only performant if you use the correct typology of graph for the correct problem. Will we be able to determine that in advance, given Drupal's flexibility and the unknown topology of the data in advance? Will that graph be performant?
Yeah, so for Drupal, or for our scenario, because we basically have one way of loading the data, we would just need a directed graph, which is actually not that bad in terms of performance. You know, it should work fine. We have a different problem in setting up the graph and with serialization of the graph, caching of the graph, which might be tricky because of all of the things that are involved. And serialization is always a problem, especially now with all of the service and dependency injection. So that might be tricky. But in general, I think we should be able to eventually fully cache it, and therefore I don't see a performance problem at all. Building the graph initially, generating the graph, and iterating all of the types in Drupal is costly. So the first time you're building the graph, it might take like a second. That's true. That's true.
A second is nothing. This is Drupal we're talking about.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like a really attractive idea. Do you have any thoughts if this approach will fly when we talk writing? Mutators for you, write operations for us, or write operations for everyone. Sorry, I don't want to divide in you and us and whatever.
I mean, the schema, the graph, sorry. First of all, we want the graph to be able to easily traverse like Drupal's type system, because for our purposes, type data is just not enough. Like, because it's too verbose and doesn't really fit our use case. We need to do a lot of heavy lifting ourselves, and that's what it should solve first. Then the second thing we want to do is being able to load things efficiently to the graph. And then the third thing we want to solve is being able to write stuff efficiently. So those are all of the problems that we want to finish. Actually, it's 4 problems. First, setting up the graph and being able to traverse it. Then second, creating a nice API for using the graph to generate like schemas as a side effect to be able to like really nicely iterate on it. And then fetching and then writing.
Right. Yes. Makes sense. My last thought is, how does this affect the current project's releases? How do you see it for GraphQL, for instance?
Well, I want to do this before I continue working on any of the GraphQL features, because otherwise it would just mean that I do twice the amount of work. First, like doing it in GraphQL with the current approach that I'm taking, which is very inconvenient and complex. So yeah, I would really prefer doing it first before continuing on any other work. It doesn't stop you from continuing with what you're doing right now. So if you feel like it's okay for you to continue, I mean, I would very much welcome if anyone of your team would also be interested in helping me with this, because as I said, I'm very much booked with work at my job as well. So if we can collaborate somehow, that would be great. But I will drive it home anyways, just a matter of time.
Yeah. The only impediment that I see with that is that it seems that you have the vision and you need to get the snowball rolling, and then we can jump in.
Sure, and I'll definitely write like some Drupal.org issues that somehow outline the architecture that I have in mind. And it might not be perfect. Like anyone can give input. It's just the idea that I had, and it was actually very quickly formulated during our discussion.
Yeah, well,
put together in 1 hour, so it's obviously not perfect. And we can iterate on that.
We'll just shame you publicly if it's not perfect. That's how it works.
Yeah, but first you have to write public blog posts about it and make it popular, and then you can shame it, because then it has a much worse effect.
Yeah. Guys, feel free to jump in another call if this doesn't stop for everyone, but I need to leave, so I'm going to click stop broadcast right now, and I guess that we will see each other next week.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can do it like half an hour earlier, if possible, if you don't have any recurring thing, because that way we don't overlap with the tweak guys. I'm pretty sure that no one wants to go to both in this group, but maybe someone else didn't come here because they preferred to go to tweak, right? But if that doesn't work, I think that this time slot works as well for me. So, all right.
All right.
That's the meeting.
Bye.